Konnichiwa minasan! In today's video I'm going to do a watercolor demonstration with the Ecoline or Ecoline watercolors and brush pens. And also today I found this little mystery packet in my house, and it wasn't supposed to come until next week, but it was already there, so yay. I'm super excited because I did not order this. I got contacted by a company a couple of days ago if I wanted to give their product a try. So if you want to know what's inside of this, then stay tuned for my next video. I hope to do it within 2 weeks, if nothing comes up. And then I'll just go unbox this. Yeah, that's going to be hard for me to leave this for 2 weeks laying inside a box. I'll be demonstrating it as well. Pardon me. So yeah, but on to the rest of the video. So in today's video I'm going to review and work with the Ecoline concentrated watercolors and their brush pens. But before I'll get into that, I want to thank Fantine Koppin for making me this awesome little fan art thingy. She drew 2 of my original characters, so thank you very much. And I just love the inside of the card, it's just so cute. It's a little thank you card for the little piece I made for her, which was a YouTube giveaway from last year, and I loved doing this one. It was so much fun. So yes, thank you very much, Fantine. I love it and I will treasure it forever. Thank you very much. So yeah, the Ecoline paints and the brush pens. I have the set of 10 here, and also a set of 10 markers. These paints and markers are being made by Royal Talents, which is a Dutch company, and actually it's funny because these paints we used to use at school back in the day, so yeah, I've got fond memories of these paints and they're just lovely. I love working with them, so as soon as I had the chance I had to go get myself a small little set here. Then there are the brush pens, which are relatively new because I haven't seen them around until I noticed them somewhere last year. So I was like, I have to give them a try. Well, they are brush pens, so they only have one end which you can use, which is also a brush nib, so that's pretty much like how a Copic marker nib would be. What comes out of it is almost exactly the same as the paint is. It's very vibrant, it's very juicy, and it dissolves very, very well. Oops, sorry. I made a little color chart of these bad boys. Let's go see where I got them. Oh yes, here I have them. Ignore the top row because those are the Winsor & Newton ink. But yeah, these are the colors that come in the 10 set for the Ecoline liquid watercolor, which is a light green, a deep green, a burnt sienna, black, light yellow, light orange, vermilion, carmine, red violet, and ultramarine deep. Blah. Sorry. And then there's the Ecoline brush pen set, which has a green, a yellow ochre, a black, Prussian blue, red violet, lemon yellow. Oh sorry, the Prussian blue and red violet aren't in there because I bought those separately, but lemon yellow, deep orange, scarlet, magenta, blue violet, ultramarine, and sky blue. And as you can tell, the colors are very vivid and just like how a concentrated watercolor should look like. My speech is terrible today. I'm sorry about that. So yeah, both the paints and the markers are dye-based ink. So not pigment based, so that means that they will fade over time or rather quickly. And so yeah, they're not light fast at all. So if you make anything with these, then it's best to just keep your artwork in a map or in a dark place, so the colors will stay and won't fade because of the sunlight or daylight. And yeah, it's best just to make artwork that you want to sell as prints, because obviously it wouldn't be wise to sell the original artwork since it will fade, or the one who bought it has to store it away. But that's not why you buy artwork, because you buy it because you want to frame it and look at it. So yeah, but yeah, that's about it. So let's get on to the tutorial. Today I'm using a different approach to get the design on the paper. Instead of sketching straight away on the end paper, I had made my initial sketch in a sketchbook, which was very small. Just one of those quick sketches to try out a composition for the initial piece. Then I blew up the tiny sketch by drawing it again, but this time bigger onto cheap printing paper. Then I placed a sheet of graphite transfer paper over my end piece with the graphite side down, and place a sketch on top of that and trace it with a red polychromo. I use red so I can see which lines I have already traced. At the end, the picture should have transferred to the end paper and you're ready to go and ink it. I usually use this method if I think I'm going to screw up the expensive paper or when I need to do a precise portrait. Some of you who have been playing Final Fantasy 15 or have watched Kinclave may already have recognized the character, but for the ones who haven't or aren't into games, today I'm drawing the ever charismatic Mr. Fedora Ardyn Izunia, simply because I fell big time for this character when I was playing through the game last December. I just love how he has those imperfections. Like, he got baggy eyes, double, and he doesn't look like a perfectly smooth and polished doll. Not that it's a bad thing, of course, but oh, and that hair, that fabulous hair. So wispy and scruffy. I could go on all day about how much I love this character. Oh, and I really loved how Keiji Fujiwara and Darin DePaul voiced this character. They really brought him to life. Anyway, back to the drawing. So for this drawing I'm using a black micron fineliner, size 03. I'm working with black this time because I'm going to work with a lot of strong and dark colors. Lighter colored ink would not stand out enough in the color palette I have in mind. After the initial line work is done, I'm going back in with the same pen and add weight to a lot of lines to put more life and interest into the line work. For the background, I want to keep things fairly simple. I wet the paper before I put the paint down, so it will help the paint flow and you can get soft edges this way. For optimal flow, make sure your brush is wetter than the paper. The other way around, you will find the paint will refuse to flow well enough. I'm using Ultramarine Deep and Red Violet for the background, and later I added some burnt sienna in the lower corner to get a blackish shade. I left a streak of the paper white in the middle to get a point of interest, and it will automatically guide your eye to the character. I really loved how vibrant the paint is and how it bloomed and mixed on the paper. It can be lifted, but it does stain the paper quite a lot. probably because it is dye based. So if you want to keep something really white, either paint around it or use masking fluid to protect your white areas. But wow, these colors really pop right off the paper. Moving on to the character, I decided to do him in parts instead of slapping paint all over the place. I started off with his cool fedora. I just really want one now too. I'm using these same colors I used in the background. Ultramarine deep, red violet and burnt sienna. But this time I am mixing in more of the burnt sienna to get a pretty dark blue blackish color. By dropping bits of water into the dark areas, the colors will become a bit lighter and you get these fun blooming textures, but only if the paint on the paper is still wet. It worked perfectly to get a bit of a leathery look. I lightened up some edges with the Ecoline colorless blender marker, which worked pretty well to get a subtle highlights. To darken some areas in the fedora some more, I went back in with a Prussian blue Ecoline brush marker. For the coat I will again use these same three colors I've been using so far, but like with the fedora, just a bit more of the burnt sienna to get the dark leathery color. Of course, I'll try to leave hints of red, violet and blue through, as leather often reflects the color it's surrounded in. Plus, it has rained in the picture, so all the more reason to have the background colors reflect onto the leathery material. I also found that these paints really react well to salt. I tried both regular kitchen salt and sea salt, and it bleached out the paint amazingly, leaving you with those amazing fluffy flowery patterns, which worked really well for the leathery texture I wanted to achieve. Just look at the left side of the coat, just love what the salt did there. Again, I go back in with the Ecoline brush markers to darken places up and to create a bit more dimension in the still flat looking coat flaps. I use a wet brush to soften up the marker strokes, so it ends up looking just like the watercolor paint. These markers are like the paint, super vibrant and react wonderfully with water, leaving no visible marks behind after you wet them. They really impressed me, and their vibrancy and dissolvability reminded me a lot of the Kuretake Clean Color Real Brush markers, which I already reviewed in another video. I'll leave a link in the description below. Currently there are 29 colors in the Ecoline brush pen line and up to 46 in the concentrated watercolor line. I hope they will add more colors to the brush pen line, because so far I really like them. Now that I was happy with the coat, I moved on to his big black umbrella. Again with the same three colors. This thing is getting really purple and blue by now. For the umbrella I used the brush pens a whole lot more to get larger areas to be dark. Watercolors always dry a bit lighter than when you apply them, but with the markers you can lay down a lot of color and water bits down to get a smoother edge and transition. Also, it's a bit easier to control than the watercolors. I just love how adding these brush pens on top of the dry paint gives you even richer results in the colors. To bring in some subtle highlights in the fedora and coat, I took some of my Polychromos pencils to highlight some edges, just to make these parts stand out a bit more, as the whole thing got a bit dark in some places. Especially the fedora could use some more highlights. I personally think color pencils are the perfect companion for watercolors. The two just work wonderfully together. I just love to mix my mediums together. Just make sure your paper is dry once you are going to use your wax or oil-based pencils. There's a chance you're damaging your paper when it's still damp, and the colored pencil won't catch on to the paper well if it's not dry. Now I'm finishing up the left side of the umbrella. The last big chunk of the painting, as the remaining bits are a lot more intricate. I've used some more of the sea salt to create textures on the umbrella. I was contemplating for a while if I'd add the frilly details the original umbrella had, but I decided against it because I worried it would pull away too much attention from the character. So finally I got onto my favorite part, that awesome crazy jumpy hair of his. Now in the game his hair color never looks the same as it differs in the given light situation. At times it looks burgundy red, while in other moments it's almost bright magenta. While in the movie it looked more brownish and against bright light almost ruby red. So for this piece I picked a magenta-ish color because I felt it fit best in the overall color composition. For the majority I will be using the red violet brush pen because it gives me a better control of how I can lay down the color in those intricate places. I just put down small strokes and dilute them with water. Once dry I layer a bit more color on top to get more intensity. Later I will layer reds and burnt sienna on top of it to get a reddish hue in his hair. Later on I shall add a bit of shadow, mainly under his fedora and on the side of his face. I'll be using a Prussian blue marker for this. Also at the same time it will add to the violet nature of his hair color. I just keep adding layer after layer until I think I got the right color tones and intensity. In this piece I really want for his hair, his scarf and his pale skin to pop out against all the other dark colors. Before you start painting or coloring a piece, it's really important to plan your colors ahead by asking yourself how many colors you want to use and which ones and where you are going to use them. Also think about where you want your light source. This will help you greatly to plan out your shadows and highlights later. It's a shame the camera doesn't pick up the true intensity and vibrancy of these paints and markers. It looks quite strong, but compared to how the picture looks in real life, it looks a bit dull and washed out, sadly. I guess the camera can't just handle all the combined awesomeness of these paints and that fancy hobo together. Moving on to the smaller details of the many layers of clothes he wears. I swear this guy's like an onion. I just used the same approach as with the hair by first laying in the color with the markers and then dilute them with water and just keep glazing colors on top until I'm happy. For his shoulder pads I'm using the same 3 colors again as I did for the majority of the painting. A lot of his clothes are almost black. I'm sprinkling in a bit of kitchen salt to get a hint of texture in there. Now for the scarf. That was going to be interesting as it has these super detailed flowery patterns, but I felt too lazy to scope out the exact pattern and to try recreate it. So instead I started with a light wash to give it some shape and shadows, and for the patterns, well, I thought of a quick, simple yet fun solution: stamping. I had a whole bunch of rubber and clear stamps, so I picked some which I thought looked convincing enough to use on his scarf slash hoodie. To avoid stamping on areas you don't want to, I used glassine paper to mask off the areas around the scarfy bits. I use glassine because it is bleed proof, so I don't have to worry about ink seeping through the masking paper onto the painting underneath. I used a blue alcohol marker to ink my stamps with, as this worked a bit better than with the watercolors. Those would somehow skip too much when you stamp them on this rougher kind of paper. The alcohol marker stamps were cleaner and more consistent. Later I glazed on top of the stamped designs with the red violet and burnt sienna watercolor to add more depth into the stamped bits. Then I took my Ivory colored Polychromos to refine some highlights on the scarf and that weird thing that seems to be attached to his coat with those holes in it. I don't know what it is. At the same time I tried to give these white bits a gentle soft glow with the colored pencil. Now it's time for some bright red goodness. I'm using a red Ecoline brush marker to lay down a base layer for the second scarf. It is getting rather ridiculous now, really. But leaving some smaller bits white to keep some contrast. I go in with the red violet and the ultramarine deep markers to lay down the shadowy bits. Then I come in with a wet clean brush and gently let the colors collide with each other and let it do their own thing. It is scary but very fun to watch as well. It's one of the things I love so much about watercolor media. Now it does its own thing and sometimes the result is better than you had hoped for. I used a bit of the bronze fine-tech paint to paint in the details on the scarf. This paint shimmers like crazy, I love it. Now, this is the part I always dread the most, as I still find it one of the hardest things to pull off right. Painting skin complexions, especially the light ones, is just so easy to mess up, and there's always going to be that hot mess state which evilly laughs at you and tries to get you to give up and cry. With this one, I started with a light wash of burnt sienna, adding light washes of blue and red violet on top, basically my background colors. It looked okay until I colored his eye and added more shadows. That's when it got into that ugly hot mess state. The only thing you should do is push through. Keep working it by adding more values and better your contrasts, and it will all work out just fine, believe me. For his face, I mainly worked wet on dry. This means you use a wet brush on dry paper. With this technique your paint won't flow and feather as much, but the colors are usually stronger unless you water them down a lot. And you get those sharp edges. And I really wanted those sharp edges in there to extra pronounce those white highlights. With watercolors you just have to experiment a whole lot to find out what looks you prefer and what technique suits your needs best. At this point I felt I wasn't getting things to look better with watercolors alone, so I grabbed my trusty Polychromos pencils again to help me out. I deepened the shadow color in his hair under the edge of his hat. By strengthening the contrast of the hair, the face started to look better as well. Then I added more blue shadows in his face, layering a bit of Indian red on top of it, and used ivory white to add more highlights. I just keep repeating these steps with the pencils, building layers to deepen the shadows while adding softer highlights with the ivory white, and use the same pencil to make a soft blend in between the highlighted and darker areas. I just keep working it until it looks right. You might not have really noticed, but I did really struggle through the entire process of coloring his face though. The color pencils really saved me there. Often if something doesn't look right, it's not always the color combination that is at fault. Often the fault lies in the contrast. Simply put, if something looks too flat or off, there is not enough contrast. It can really help to photograph or scan your painting and turn it into a grayscale on the computer. By doing this you can easily tell if you need more contrast in your piece, because if there is a lack of contrast, your grayscale will turn up mostly grey, with not enough whites and blacks. Once you work on your contrast, you will see what a difference it will make for your picture. Funnily enough, doing his neck went a whole lot easier. Phew. But boy, do I really need to practice light skin tones with watercolor some more. Now that I got the hard part out of the way, it's time to cut loose again on his funny white frilly looking blouse thing that seems to be held together by that red scarf thing of his. I will mainly use light washes of the three background colors, wet into wet, and let the paint do its own thing. It's such a nice change of pace after tediously fiddling around to get his face right. Lastly, I'll be coloring his fingers, the stem of his umbrella and the adornments on his shoulder pads. And for the last touches, I'll be using a white gel pen to add some final highlights. I really enjoyed using these transparent watercolors by Talents and their brush pens. I absolutely loved how vivid both are and how easily the marker's ink dissolved and how lovely it all blended together. Also, these are quite affordable. The brush pens go for about €250 per pen and the paint sells for about €2.95 per 30ml bottle. I wouldn't recommend them if you're selling original artwork because of the light fastness issues, but for printmaking or for your everyday casual art fun, I do highly recommend them because they are a joy to use and to behold. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave me a like if you did and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss out on any of my future videos. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave me a comment below this video. So thank you for watching and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Have a good one. Oh, and remember, there's no wrong way to love a chocobo.